Good evening, I'm Lee Zurich.
And I'm Lauren McCoy. With New Orleans dealing with a crime crisis, the district attorney's office is trying to improve its lowest violent felony conviction rate since the height of COVID-19.
Andres Fuentes has more on the DA's plans to fight crime and details some of the worries of a criminal justice system watchdog.
District Attorney Jason Williams stood side by side with notable New Orleans East figures to talk about the city's crime crisis and the murders of Kane Sanders and Christopher Cornelius, both shot and killed last year near Coran Road and Benson Street.
What we're talking about today is convictions. The system working together to get that person that was responsible for the crime they were caught for, and then possibly many others.
Williams' office was able to convict Devion Taylor for the double homicide, which is a win for the office. But the Metropolitan Crime Commission reports among the 343 violent felony cases the DA's office received this year, only 7% resulted in guilty as charged convictions. According to the crime watchdog group, that's the lowest since 2021 when COVID-19 crippled the criminal justice system.
It's not a hiccup.
Williams says it's difficult to complete a violent felony case when evidence is lacking.
When there is evidence, when there's witness testimony, the case is going to move forward. Sometimes witnesses are willing to talk the day of an incident, but when the case goes to trial, they're not willing to come to court, swear, take an oath, and testify.
But Raphael Gonecci of the Metropolitan Crime Commission says he's worried about the low conviction rate and that 36% of cases were changed to a misdemeanor and 27% were lowered to a lesser felony.
If the district attorney's office dismisses or reduces a violent felony to a misdemeanor, it means that potentially a violent offender is back out on the streets. That's an indication of a problem either in screening or in the trial division.
Williams and Councilman Oliver Thomas says the way forward is all branches of the justice system working more fluidly, from the streets to the courtroom.
Constitutional proactive policing. Constitutional proactive prosecution. Right?
But Gonecci thinks the DA's office suffers from many of the same systemic issues as the NOPD, mainly in its pay for staffers and issues with management.
So the scrutiny that we've been giving to the police department to try and identify the causes for the attrition and pose solutions to that, maybe we need to apply that to the district attorney's office as well.
DA Williams says an easy way to help gather evidence is if more people installed Ring cameras or surveillance cameras around their homes to catch potential crimes on tape. Back to you guys in studio.